Hi, my name is Joe Smith. I'm the Executive Director of Broken Strength, The Path to Purity. We're a ministry whose mission is to equip churches to help their men in the battle for sexual purity, especially as it relates to pornography. I'm here with Frank Schmidt, and Frank is the youth pastor at Jubilee Community Church in the South Minneapolis area and has agreed to be interviewed. So Frank, thank you for coming.
Yeah, glad to be here.
How were you first exposed to pornography?
Yeah, like many, my journey began with curiosity. When I was growing up, my parents never really talked to me about sex, really at all, and yet I was surrounded by it. When I think of what my classmates at school were talking about, what I was watching on TV, the video games we're playing, even in the garage at home, my dad had pictures of naked women posted everywhere. So from as young as I can remember, I was surrounded by this sexuality, pornography, and I was very curious. So as I'm growing, I have all these urges within me that are developing that I don't really understand. And so I just began searching. My brother and I, we didn't have internet at home, so my brother and I would go to the public library just to use their computers. And we knew what each other were doing, but we never really talked about it. So we'd go and we'd look at images of naked women on the computer, and then we'd go home. And so over time, that just continued to escalate into more and more, as I wasn't satisfied with what I was seeing. So I started searching for images of naked men. I started watching short video clips, and then it escalated to the point where we got internet at our house. We got a computer. I had a computer in my own bedroom. And so what started as looking maybe once a month at still images turned into watching more hardcore forms of pornography, turned into every week, turned into every day, to the point where I started high school. I was absolutely consumed by this lustful desire and watching homosexual pornography in large part. And so beginning to struggle in a lot of ways with same-sex attraction, which I was too ashamed to tell anybody. So I have this growing secret addiction that's just consuming me to the point where I was really lost and in a very dark, kind of hopeless place.
Were you part of a church during that time?
Yeah, my family actually attended a Roman Catholic church. So I would describe my family as very nominal Catholic. We went to church on Sunday because that's what good people do. So I was there every Sunday for church. I was there every Wednesday for their CCD program. And yeah, it wasn't really a living relationship with God. It was more of an empty, kind of dead religious tradition. So you go to Sunday church and you go through the motions, but then you live your life however you want the rest of the week. And so I saw a lot of that hypocrisy actually in that most of the people in my hometown, most of the people I went to school with went to this church, but they didn't really know God. The thing I did learn from the church is that you have to be a good enough person for God to love you. So do enough good things, God will love you. Don't do enough good things, God doesn't love you. So as I was struggling with my pornography addiction in secret, at first I just enjoyed it. But over time, the shame and the guilt grew. And the only message I was hearing from the church is, you're going to go to hell because you're not a good person. The more I tried to be a good person, the more it seemed like I sank into my sin, the worse I felt. So this kind of downward spiral just continued with depression, with loneliness, with insecurity. Honestly, I didn't think I was ever going to get free. I thought this is just the way life is going to always be. It's just going to be really, really hard, and then you die. But I really wanted, there's a point in high school where I just was so lost that I really wanted something to change. And so I became more religious. I would pray more. Every time I would look at pornography and I would fall, I would pray through the rosary. I would get out. Our family had one Bible hidden away that we never read. I would get it out and I would read just to try to make myself feel better. But the harder I tried, it just seemed like the deeper I sank.
What changed? So you're in high school.
I was in high school. And my parents, again, they have no idea what I'm going through. They never talked to me at all about it. I had gotten connected with a couple of friends who were part of an evangelical free church in the same town I grew up in. And so they invited me to come to youth group. So I was going to the Catholic church Wednesdays and Sundays. I started going to this youth group on Mondays. And at first, I just went because it was fun. We played games, we ate food, we hung out. I don't really remember the message being spoken. But I think I kept coming back because it was the first place I really felt loved. Like they wanted me here. They cared about me. And so the junior year of high school, they'd always talked about this big youth conference they go to every year. And up to that point, I said, no, I'm not interested. I don't really want to go to that. For whatever reason, my junior year, I said, yes, I want to go. So here I am, January, I'm 16 years old. And the speaker starts talking about the love of God. He talks about how Jesus came to die for us, how he offers salvation as a free gift, not something we have to earn, something we can't earn. We just receive it by faith. Honestly, it was like the chains just fell off in that moment. This is the good news that I have been longing for so long, that God loved me and accepted me because of what Jesus had done, not because of what I had done.
Right.
And so that night we broke into kind of a small group. So it was my youth pastor and a couple of my close friends. And that was the first time I ever really started to share with them about my faith in God, how I'd been I didn't share explicitly about pornography. I wasn't quite ready to go there.
Right.
But just opening up a little bit of how I felt so lonely, how I felt so insecure, how I really wanted to know God, but it was this long journey of trying to find out who he is and how the gospel was such good news to me. So after that conference, we come back home. My youth pastor starts a little Bible study with my friends and I began growing immensely in my faith. I mean, before this point, I hadn't really read the Bible consistently on my own. I didn't really pray before that point. I didn't really get anything out of church before that point. But this was the beginning of the Spirit of God really giving me new life. And so I began growing immensely. My mom actually encouraged me to start going to the Evangelical Free Church, which was a huge step coming from
interesting.
A Catholic family to have. I think she just saw God was doing something in my life. I had new hope. I had new purpose that I didn't have before. So as I'm growing in my faith, I also have this secret struggle with pornography still that I'm deeply ashamed of and I really want to be done with. And so I'm trying really hard to get through it on my own. But the more I struggle, the more I think God is telling me, you need to confess this. As every time I pray, God, help me to overcome this. I feel like he's saying, you need to confess this. And then as I read the scriptures, I read verses like 1 John, if we confess our sins, he's faithful and just to forgive us. Or James, confess your sins to one another. I couldn't get over this. I need to tell somebody, but I cannot. It's too hard. Finally, I become so desperate that I think I texted my youth pastor. I said, hey, can we meet? So he meets with me in his office and he just listens to my story. I was terrified he was going to reject me as I start sharing in my struggle with pornography. Yeah, he loved me. He accepted me. He prayed for me. He wept with me. And that was so powerful in that moment to be known at a deeper level and to be loved. And yeah, I was still too ashamed of the same-sex attraction that I wasn't ready to go there yet. So God definitely used that initial confession in a big way to help me overcome what I had been struggling with. But my journey was by no means over. It was just the beginning point, really, of God setting me free, which would then continue over many more years, into college even.
Into college. And so Satan wants us alone, isolated, shamed, in the dark, no hope, no help.
Yeah.
And so what does the gospel say?
Yeah. Jesus gave his life for those who have no hope, for those who are alone. That was me. And that was the power of God was breaking into my life in a powerful way as I heard the gospel and I heard of God's love, but then I experienced it in a tangible way as my youth pastor sat and listened to me and loved me. And I had that same experience again in college as I'm a new Christian, been a Christian for about a year and a half, and I'm attending the University of Northwestern, St. Paul. And God gave me some really good friendships with other men that first year in my dorm hall. We started doing this Bible study together called Men's Fraternity. And that was the first time that I had ever experienced other men being vulnerable, sharing honestly of their struggles. And I started to understand more of what was behind my addiction. I realized that pornography for me was more of a medication, just trying to cover up some deeper issues. Like my dad growing up was not close to me at all. He was physically present. He was a hard worker, good ethics, but he never really was there for me in terms of emotionally or spiritually, or especially this area of sexuality. We never talked about it. And I desperately needed him to be involved in my life in that way. So I'm realizing that I have this father wound that I've been longing for a dad who I know is proud of me, who I know loves me, who's helping me grow into manhood. I realized I didn't have that. I also realized that I was very alone. I was all through my life growing up, I was very lonely. I had very few like really deep, intimate friends. And I realized that I was longing for that kind of intimacy, to be known and loved. And so it came to the point the next year in college where I'm growing immensely in my faith. I haven't watched pornography for a couple of years at this point. I'm still struggling with lustful fantasies. I'm still struggling with masturbation. And I'm at a retreat at the beginning of my sophomore year of college. And I'm with some of these close friends that I've been growing with that first year. And there was a session we went to talking about confession and how often we only confess to a certain extent, but we don't share the full depth because we want to control how much shame we feel. I'm like, that's me.
Amen.
And so I knew exactly what I needed to do. So afterwards we break into small groups, and I finally break down with my brothers and say, I've been really struggling with same-sex attraction, and I've been too ashamed to tell anybody. And I think this is the reason why I'm still really struggling. Is this shame has me locked in prison. I was terrified they would reject me. They would think less of me. They would not want to spend time with me ever again. But they loved me. They wept with me. They prayed with me. They gave me a big hug. And again, the love of God was becoming so tangible for me as they knew me truly, completely, and they loved me just like God does. And so I think for me, that was a huge part of walking in freedom from sexual sin, is experiencing that love of God in such a powerful way in the context of that community.
Two things really struck me as you're talking. Number one, the role of confession in the life of the Christian that is seldom talked about, and yet I think is so important. And the role of community, which the local church, by God's design, is intended to provide, so that we walking wounded have a hospital to go to that won't turn us away at the door. And so I'm so happy to hear that. And so does this play at all into your ministry now with youth?
Absolutely. I think every young man that I know struggles in some way, shape, or form with sexuality, with pornography, with masturbation. And I think the most common thing I hear is, I have nobody to talk to about this. I have no one to walk with me through this. And that really hurt me as a young man growing up, not having anybody to walk with me and being forced in a lot of ways to learn on my own. And now have had to relearn because of so much brokenness and so many lies that I had believed for so long. And so, yeah, absolutely. It's a huge piece of discipleship now is seeking to walk with young men to help them get a God-centered perspective of who they are and how this gift of sexuality, how God's given it to them for good. And just helping them embrace that good design hopefully before they experience some of the hard things I had to walk through.
Isolation is such a big deal. Shame. When we're isolated, when we're in the dark, that's exactly where Satan wants us. But when we bring sin to the light, where the Spirit works, and we confess our sin, God is faithful and just to forgive us our sin and cleanse us from all unrighteousness.
Yeah, absolutely.
Frank, thank you for your time.
Thank you.